Today we are going to be learning about the early life of Andrew Jackson. Now, Andrew Jackson was a fantastic but horrible, delightful but terrible person, all at the same time, rolled into one complicated person. Andrew Jackson's parents were Scotch-Irish immigrants who had come to the colonies in the mid-1760s. By 1767, they were living in the Waxhaws community, which was a settlement between the border of North and South Carolina. Now, the Waxhaws was a really tough place to live. There was great farmland there, but the problem was the crime rate. The settlers fought with each other. The settlers fought with the Indians. There were a lot of very poor people struggling to survive there. And it's there, 1767, Andrew is going to be born. Sadly, Andrew's father died a few months before Andrew made his appearance in the world. And that left Andrew's mom in a terrible spot. To be a widow lady with children on the American frontier was almost unimaginably difficult. Those women left behind had to depend upon the kindness of strangers or family members to take them in. Now, the Jackson family had family members who were willing to take them in exchange for Andrew's mom becoming their maid. So off she goes with her 3 boys in tow. Now, Andrew's mom had big dreams for her youngest son. Like any good Scotch-Irish mom, she dreamed of him becoming a Presbyterian minister. It didn't take her long to figure out Andrew didn't have the temperament to be a preacher. He was quick to anger. He was full of pranks and practical jokes. He didn't take his schoolwork seriously. He's what we would call a handful. So she abandoned that idea rather quickly. Well, around this time, the American Revolution pushes its way into the Carolinas, and the Jackson boys want to do their part in the fight for American independence. So the oldest son, Hugh, joins the South Carolina militia. He was 16 at the time. He dies within a few months of joining in Charleston from heat stroke. Now, this is where the history gets a little fuzzy. Some historians believe that Andrew and his brother Robert joined the South Carolina militia. Some believe no, they weren't allowed to join because they were too young and they just became messengers. Either way, it was really dangerous what they were doing, especially at their ages. Andrew was 13. And he was captured by British soldiers, he and his brother both. And while they're prisoners of war, a British officer orders Andrew to polish his boots. And that young 13-year-old Andrew refuses, and the officer lashes out with his sword, and he permanently scars Andrew. Now, Andrew's mother learns of the whereabouts of her sons, and that tough woman traveled to where they were and negotiated their release from the British soldiers. Unfortunately, by this time, both boys had the smallpox, and when they arrived home, Andrew lost his remaining brother to smallpox. Well, shortly thereafter, Andrew's mother dies also from a different disease. And she tells Andrew, Andrew, you're just going to have to make your own way in this world. And so he does. For a time, he travels from place to place. By the age of 15, he's a war veteran and an orphan, making his way as he travels. Eventually, he lands in an area where he meets a lawyer who's impressed with Andrew's pluck and his toughness and his quick wit and his independence, and he teaches him how to become a lawyer. Andrew takes the required coursework, and by the age of 21, he's a lawyer on his way to Tennessee. He settles in Nashville, and there he encounters the Donaldson family. Now, the Donaldsons were a really rich and influential family at the time, and Mr. Donaldson admires Andrew and invites him to move in as a boarder. Well, now the Donaldsons have a daughter whose name is Rachel. Rachel had recently left her husband in Kentucky and become divorced, which was really unusual at the time. No one did that. Well, you know where this story's going. Andrew meets Rachel. He finds that she's very attractive. Not only that, she can ride a horse, she sings beautifully, and she smokes a corncob pipe. What else could a man possibly want in a woman? Nothing, decides Andrew, and he marries her. Now, by this time, Andrew has been appointed congressman to Tennessee when it was first introduced as a state. You remember learning that. Now, Andrew, he doesn't like being a congressman. He resigns his seat shortly after being appointed congressman. Here's why. To travel from Nashville to Philadelphia at that time took 40 days on horseback. And Andrew didn't like being away from Rachel or their new home, the Hermitage Plantation, for that long of a time. So he resigns. He continues his work in Nashville. He becomes a judge. He has the respect of lots of people for his toughness. Once a man shouted something awful at him in court, and Andrew chased the man himself out of court yelling, "Come back, you villain!" That's the kind of guy he was. Well, then Andrew becomes senator, which I don't know why he'd want to do that, because he didn't like being congressman. And again, he resigns that seat, doesn't like being away from Rachel. So he decides he's going to do his public work in this state of Tennessee so he can be at home. And he's going to run to be sergeant major of the Tennessee militia. Well, guess what? So is John Sevier. And John Sevier and Andrew Jackson can't stand each other. Probably because they're both climbing the political ladder. They're both recognized as leaders of the day. And John Sevier can hardly stand it when Andrew Jackson gets the job. So he runs into Andrew Jackson in public and yells insults at him. Well, Andrew Jackson rushes home, writes this letter to John Sevier telling him what he thinks of him and his insults. John Sevier gets the letter, shows it to everyone, making fun of Andrew's inability to spell and his poor grammar. Well, this infuriates Andrew, so he does what people did then. He challenges John Sevier to a duel. And the way that worked is like you put an ad in the paper that said something like, "Show up at this time and date so I can shoot you." And if you didn't show up so that you could be shot at, it was like a big insult to your manhood. So John Sevier is going to show up for this duel. Now, there are no two stories about that duel that are exactly the same. So we don't really know what happened. Andrew Jackson's friends say that John Sevier showed up and saw Andrew Jackson and got so scared that he ran and hid behind a tree. Not true, say John Sevier's supporters. Andrew Jackson saw John Sevier coming and ran and jerked him off his horse and beat him with his cane before he even had a chance to prepare for this duel. Either way, we don't know what happened, but Andrew Jackson left feeling satisfied that his dignity had been restored. Now, tomorrow, we're going to take a look at Jackson's rise to national fame. He is going to become a military leader that is known all over the new nation.